This is an install video for a Suzuki DB52 and DA63 4-inch lift kit. Let's get started. Start by removing the two 14mm bolts that hold the shock in. We're going to reuse these, take them down with us. Done. The next step is to pop the hood. We're going to need to take the headlights out and remove the front bumper for easy access to the steering shaft and lowering the front subframe. Each headlight has two bolts that you can remove with the Phillips. The bumper has 3 bolts here. There's 2 from underneath, and there's 1 behind each headlight. You can probably do this with power tools. It's easy enough. It does just pop out. Use a paint pen to mark the steering shaft for removal. This will allow the front differential to lower down and allow you to remove the steering shaft to extend it. It's a 12mm. Mark the steering shaft on the inside before we unhook it. We're also going to remove that boot. It's important to keep the steering wheel straight at this point. So when we weld in the extension, everything's going to line back up. Remove the plastic shield. It has 5 Phillips screws. Also remove this splash shield. We're going to support the truck and we're going to lower the subframe down. If you're doing this on the ground, you're going to want to go the other way, support the subframe and lift the truck up to fit the lift in. This splash shield also can come down. To space down the front subframe on each side at the front, there's a spacer that goes between the subframe and the frame here and here. And then there's a spacer that goes in between the frame and the rear steering arm on each side. And then you also have the differential torque arm spacer and a spacer that goes between the engine mount and the frame back here. These are 14mm bolts on everything besides the front subframe is a 17mm bolt. We're going to reuse these bolts with the lift, so keep them. Reuse the factory bolts. We use the factory bolts into the frame. this side too. Try to stop videoing. Look at these tightened up. And we'll attach the arms to the bottom of these with the 10mm bolts that come with the kit. I'll leave the strain on the diff sensor.
What's the lunch, guys?
4-inch lift kit.
Boom. On the diff torque arm spacer mount, add this lock washer and also add red Loctite. It's going to cause big issues if these come loose. Reuse the 12mm bolts back into the frame, and then the bolts that come with the kit go through the subframe. Have the nuts on the top on this one. Side first. Be careful with the fine threads, don't cross thread them. Start them by hand first. We're gonna add this spacer with the new supplied bolts and lock washers. Be careful with these, they're fine thread. So recap, we got the spacer on each side on the front and the arms, the lower control arms, the diff torque arm spacer, and the rear engine spacer. We're going to leave the bracket that holds the radiator hose and other hoses unhooked, as well as the harness for the diff sensor. Reinstall the rear two splash shields. We're going to add the spacers to the front shocks. You're going to reuse the nuts on top of the shock. And then the supplied 8mm hardware will go through the top of the shock and the frame. Use the supplied 8mm bolts in the shock tower. It's a 13mm wrench. Good? Oh, yeah. Just put Loctite on the bolts that go through the top of the shock, through the frame. Cut your shaft somewhere in the middle to prepare the steering shaft for the extension to be welded in. With the steering shaft extension welded in place, the overall length should be about 21 1/4. You can remove the cotter pins and the screws after it's completed welding and touch up the paint on the shaft. So slide the boot back over the steering shaft. You're going to have to insert the steering shaft from inside the cab, and you're going to want to hook up the bottom first outside the truck. Pretty sure. Yeah, because then this is all turned. Come on. Might be one off. There we go. And then do the inside. There we go. Then we're going to use the supplied self-tappers to screw this boot down to the firewall. Tighten these bolts back up, 13 millimeter. When you reattach the front bumper, there's clips on both sides that will hold it in place, and then the lights on the bottom outside have this alignment pin. So we're gonna be adding a spacer in between the differential tube and the leaf springs. So we're gonna be replacing these U-bolts, loosen all 4 of the nuts on the U-bolts, and only do one side at a time. You want to hold the axle in place before you unhook it. Ratchet strap works well. Remove the lower shock mount. Again, just on one side at a time. Remove the wheel so that you have better access. Remove the bolt guiding the parking brake cable. Remove the bolts holding the parking brake line on each side. There's 3 on each side that you're going to need to undo. It's a 10 millimeter bolt.
She hasn't messaged me in a long time.
Use a ratchet strap to pull the axle back and get the alignment pin to drop into the spacer. Works better if you have a better ratchet strap. If I could see, there we go. I can see with my hands. Should tighten up. Yard sale. Remove the wheel. Reuse the bottom axle's U-bolt cup and the factory bump stop.
Yep.
To relieve the stress on this soft line for the brakes, just bend down this mounting bracket. On the right hand side of the truck, you'll reattach the parking brake cable to the leaf spring guide and then leave the other two. On the left hand side, you'll reattach the rearmost parking brake cable mount and then also the one that's on the leaf spring guide. This is the final product of the leaf spring spacers in the rear that have the shock relocation on them. This is a list of everything that is removed and replaced. The boot for the steering shaft, the top cones for the front shocks, the U-bolts in the rear for the leaf springs, the 2 bolts that hold the rear shocks in place, the 3 bolts on the engine mount on the left hand side, and a couple of brake brackets